You already know this feeling, don't you? That quiet weight sitting on your chest the moment you open your eyes. That split second before your mind starts making excuses, before your hand reaches for the phone, before you tell yourself the same lie you told yesterday. Just a little longer. And right there, in that fragile moment, your entire life is decided. Not in some grand, dramatic turning point, but in that small, almost invisible choice. You think weakness is loud, obvious, something you can point at and say, that's the problem. No, weakness is subtle. It's patient. It doesn't break you in one strike. It erodes you, slowly, deliberately, until one day you wake up and realize you become someone you don't even respect. And here's the part you don't want to hear, the part you keep pushing away because it burns. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are a product of your decisions. Every delay, every excuse, every time you said later instead of now, you weren't forced into it. You chose it. Let that sink in. You chose to stay in bed when you knew you should get up. You chose comfort over growth. You chose distraction over discipline. And the worst part is, you knew exactly what you were doing while you were doing it. There was a voice in your head, wasn't there? Quiet, but clear. It told you, get up. It told you, do the work. It told you, stop wasting time. But you ignored it, not because you couldn't hear it, but because you didn't want to. Because listening to that voice would mean facing discomfort, and you've trained yourself to run from discomfort like it's something dangerous, something to avoid at all costs. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. Discomfort is the price of becoming someone stronger, and you've been refusing to pay it. So what happens? You stay where you are, stuck. Not because you lack potential, but because you lack the willingness to act on it. And don't misunderstand me. Potential means nothing. It's a seductive word, a comforting word. It makes you feel like you're capable without demanding that you prove it. You tell yourself, I could do more, I could be better, but you don't. And every time you repeat that cycle, you reinforce the identity of someone who doesn't follow through. That's who you're becoming. Not because it's who you are at your core, but because it's who you practice being every single day. Identity is not something you're born with. It's something you build through repetition. And right now, you are rehearsing weakness. You are practicing hesitation. You are perfecting the art of avoiding what matters. And then you wonder why you feel stuck, why you feel frustrated, why there's this quiet dissatisfaction following you around like a shadow you can't escape. It's not random. It's not bad luck. It's the natural consequence of your own patterns. You don't get to repeatedly choose comfort and then complain about a lack of progress. You don't get to avoid discipline and then wish for confidence. Confidence is earned. Discipline is built. And both of them require something you've been unwilling to give: consistent, uncomfortable action. But instead, you've been negotiating with yourself. Every day, a negotiation. I'll start tomorrow. I'll do it later. I just need a break. And every time you negotiate, you lower your own standards. You teach yourself that your word means nothing. You say you'll do something, and then you don't. And your brain notices. It learns. It adapts. It stops taking you seriously. That's why it gets easier to quit the next time, and the next time, and the next time. Because you've built a pattern where quitting is normal, where avoiding is expected, where weakness is comfortable. And comfort is the most dangerous trap you will ever fall into, because it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels safe. It feels justified. It feels like something you deserve. But comfort, unchecked, will quietly destroy your life. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in slow decay. Days wasted, opportunities missed, skills never developed, dreams that never moved beyond imagination. And all the while, you keep telling yourself a story, that you're just waiting for the right moment, the right motivation, the right circumstances. But those things are not coming. There is no perfect moment. There is no magical surge of motivation that will suddenly transform you into a disciplined person. That's another lie, another excuse, another way to delay the action you know you should be taking right now. And deep down, you know this. That's why it bothers you. That's why there's this tension inside you, this quiet frustration that never fully goes away. Because a part of you, a stronger part, is aware of what you're capable of. It sees the gap between where you are and where you could be. And that gap, that distance, is painful. Not because it's impossible to close, but because you're not even trying. Or worse, you start and then you stop. You get a spark of motivation, you make a plan, you tell yourself, this time will be different. And for a moment, it feels real. You take action, you feel momentum, and then you slip, you hesitate, you miss one day, then another, and suddenly you're back where you started. And instead of confronting that pattern, instead of analyzing why it keeps happening, you fall back into the same comforting narrative. I'll try again later. But later never comes. It just becomes another version of tomorrow, always out of reach. And while you're stuck in this loop, life keeps moving. Time doesn't wait for you to get your act together. It doesn't pause while you figure things out. It keeps going. And every day you spend in this state of hesitation is a day you don't get back. You are trading your future for temporary comfort. That's the deal you're making, whether you admit it or not. And the cost is higher than you think, because it's not just about lost time. It's about who you become in the process. Every day you choose weakness, you reinforce an identity that will shape your entire life. You become someone who avoids challenges, someone who breaks promises to themselves, someone who watches others move forward while you stay in the same place, wondering why nothing changes. And that's the real danger. Not that you'll fail once or twice, but that you'll settle into a version of yourself that never truly tries, that never fully commits, that never pushes past discomfort long enough to see what's on the other side. And if that continues, if you keep choosing this path, then the outcome is predictable. Not dramatic, not sudden, just empty. A life that feels smaller than it should. A constant sense that you could have done more, been more, but didn't. And the hardest part? You won't be able to blame anyone else. Because deep down, you'll know the truth. You'll know that it wasn't a lack of opportunity, or talent, or intelligence. It was a series of small, daily choices. Choices that felt insignificant in the moment, but accumulated into something massive over time. That's how weakness works. It doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as comfort, as rest, as taking it easy. But underneath all of that, it's the same thing, avoidance. And avoidance is a decision, which means weakness is a decision, not something you're born with, not something imposed on you, something you choose, over and over again, until it becomes who you are. And if that truth makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Because that discomfort is the first honest signal you've had in a long time. It's the part of you that hasn't given up yet, the part that knows you're capable of more. But knowing isn't enough. Awareness without action is just another form of self-deception. You can recognize your patterns, you can understand your weaknesses, you can even feel motivated for a moment, but if you don't act differently, nothing changes. You stay the same person, repeating the same cycle, hoping for a different result. And hope, without action, is useless. So stop hiding behind it. Stop pretending that things will somehow improve on their own. They won't. Not until you make a different choice. Not until you decide that comfort is no longer your priority. Not until you stop negotiating with the weaker version of yourself and start overriding it. Because that version of you, the one that hesitates, the one that avoids, the one that keeps you stuck, it's not permanent, it's not fixed, it's not unchangeable, it's just practiced. And anything that is practiced can be replaced. But only if you're willing to face the truth without flinching. Only if you're willing to take responsibility for where you are right now. No excuses, no blame, just clarity. Because clarity is where change begins. And right now, you have a choice. The same choice you've had every day until this point. Continue down the path of least resistance, or confront the version of yourself that's been holding you back. Not tomorrow, not later, now. It's 6 a.m. The alarm cuts through the silence, sharp and unforgiving. And for a brief second, you're awake enough to know exactly what needs to be done. But then the negotiation begins, quiet, familiar, almost automatic. Just 5 more minutes, you say, and your hand moves before your mind can resist. The alarm is gone, the room is quiet again, and in that small decision, nothing seems broken, nothing feels dramatic. It even feels harmless. But what you don't see is the pattern tightening its grip. Because this isn't just about 5 minutes. It's about who you are training yourself to be when no one is watching. And by the time you wake up again, later than you planned, slightly rushed, slightly annoyed, the day has already started with a loss. Not a visible one, not something you can measure in numbers, but a loss of control, a loss of discipline, a quiet signal sent to your brain that says, "My intentions don't matter." And that signal echoes through everything that follows. You skip the workout because you're late. You grab whatever is easy instead of what is right. You tell yourself you'll make up for it later, but later becomes another negotiation, another compromise, another subtle surrender. And by the time you sit down to work, your focus is scattered, your energy diluted, and you start looking for something easier to do, something that doesn't demand effort. So you open a tab, then another, telling yourself it's just a quick break, just a moment to reset. But minutes turn into an hour, and that hour turns into a quiet frustration you try not to acknowledge. Because facing it would mean admitting that you're doing it again, repeating the same cycle you swore you would break. And this is how weakness operates in real life, not as a single catastrophic failure, but as a series of small, almost invisible choices that stack on top of each other until the weight becomes undeniable. And the cost isn't just in what you didn't do today. It's in what today is shaping you into tomorrow. Because every time you choose the easier path, you reinforce a version of yourself that avoids pressure, that resists effort, that delays responsibility. And that version doesn't stay contained within one part of your life. It spreads. It leaks into everything, into your work where you start settling for average, doing just enough to get by, avoiding challenges that might expose your limits, into your relationships where you become passive, where you stop showing up with intention, where you let conversations drift, where you avoid difficult truths because they require courage, and into your personal goals, where your ambitions slowly shrink to match your behavior, because deep down, you can't keep pretending you're someone who executes when your actions prove otherwise. And that disconnect creates a quiet tension, a low-grade dissatisfaction that follows you even in moments that are supposed to feel good, because you know, even if you don't say it out loud, that you're capable of more than what you're delivering. And that knowledge becomes heavy over time. It builds. It presses against you, especially in the quiet moments, late at night when there are no distractions left, when the noise fades and you're left alone with your thoughts, and you start replaying the day, thinking about what you could have done, what you should have done, and you promise yourself that tomorrow will be different, that tomorrow you'll wake up on time, that tomorrow you'll stay focused, that tomorrow you'll finally take control. But when tomorrow arrives, it looks exactly like today, because nothing fundamentally changed. The same habits, the same triggers, the same patterns are still there, and without intervention, they will keep producing the same results. And this is where the real cost of weakness reveals itself, not in a single moment, but in repetition, in the accumulation of days that look almost identical, where progress is minimal or non-existent, where time passes but growth does not, and you start to feel stuck, not because you lack direction, but because you lack execution. And that feeling of being stuck is one of the most dangerous states you can live in, because it drains your confidence, it erodes your belief in yourself. Every broken promise, every unfinished task, every avoided challenge becomes evidence that you can't rely on yourself. And once that belief takes hold, it affects everything. You hesitate more, you doubt your decisions, you second-guess your actions. And hesitation leads to inaction. And inaction reinforces the belief that you're not capable, creating a cycle that feeds itself. And while this is happening internally, externally life keeps moving. Opportunities come and go, chances to improve, to learn, to step forward. And you see them, you recognize them, but you don't act, or you act too late, or you start and then stop. And each missed opportunity adds another layer of regret. Not loud, not overwhelming at first, but persistent, like a quiet voice reminding you of what could have been. And over time, that voice gets harder to ignore, especially when you see others moving forward. People who are not necessarily more talented or more intelligent, but more consistent, more disciplined, more willing to do the hard things you keep avoiding. And it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the gap between you and where you want to be is not a mystery. It's a result of daily decisions. Decisions that seem small in the moment, but have compounded into something significant. And this is the part most people underestimate, the compounding effect of weakness. Because just like discipline builds strength over time, weakness builds limitation. Every shortcut taken, every effort avoided, every excuse accepted, doesn't just affect that moment, it shapes your baseline. It lowers your standard of what is normal. And once a lower standard becomes normal, it's incredibly difficult to break out of it, because it no longer feels wrong, It feels familiar, and familiarity is comfortable, even when it's holding you back. And that's why so many people stay in this state for years. Not because they don't want more, but because they've adapted to less. They've adjusted their expectations to match their behavior, convincing themselves that this is just how things are, that maybe this is all they're capable of. But that's not the truth. The truth is they've been conditioned by their own choices, and conditioning can be reversed, but only if it's acknowledged, only if you stop pretending that these small decisions don't matter, because they do. They matter more than the big ones. They are the big ones. They are the foundation everything else is built on, and if the foundation is weak, nothing you build on top of it will hold. Not your goals, not your plans, not your intentions. Because at the first sign of pressure, at the first moment of discomfort, the same pattern will take over. The same instinct to avoid, to delay, to choose the easier path. And you'll find yourself back where you started, wondering why nothing sticks, why nothing changes. And the answer will always lead back to the same place, to the daily choices you make when no one is watching, when there is no external pressure, when it's just you and your decision. Because that's where your real character is revealed. Not in what you say you'll do, but in what you actually do when it's inconvenient, when it's uncomfortable, when it requires effort. And if you're honest with yourself, truly honest, you'll see the pattern. You'll see how often you've chosen the easier route, how often you've justified it, how often you've told yourself it doesn't matter. But it does. It always does. Because those choices don't disappear. They accumulate. They shape your habits. Your habits shape your identity. And your identity shapes your life. And that's the real cost of staying weak. It's not just about today or tomorrow. It's about the trajectory of your entire life. The direction you're heading based on the patterns you're reinforcing right now. And if nothing changes, if you continue making the same choices, following the same routines, listening to the same excuses, then the outcome is predictable. Not because fate decided it, but because you did, through repetition, through consistency in the wrong direction. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to break. Not impossible, but harder. Because you're not just fighting a habit anymore. You're fighting an identity that has been built over time. An identity that feels familiar, that feels comfortable, even if it's limiting. And breaking away from that requires effort, requires awareness, requires a willingness to face discomfort without immediately escaping it. And that's exactly what weakness has been training you not to do. It has been training you to avoid, to delay, to choose ease over growth. And until that pattern is interrupted, until you consciously choose a different response in those small, critical moments, nothing will change. The days will continue to look the same, the frustration will continue to build, and the gap between where you are and where you could be will continue to widen. Not because you lack the ability to close it, but because you're not taking the actions required to do so. And that is the cost. Not a single dramatic failure, but a slow, steady drift away from your potential, driven by choices that felt insignificant at the time, but have proven to be anything but insignificant in their impact. You've been told your whole life that you need more motivation, more discipline, more willpower, that somewhere inside you there's something missing, and if you could just find it, unlock it, activate it, then everything would change. But what if that's not just wrong? What if that belief itself is the trap that's been keeping you weak this entire time? Because it quietly convinces you that the problem is internal, invisible, something abstract you need to feel before you act, when in reality, the system is far more brutal, far more mechanical, and far less emotional than you've been led to believe. Because weakness is not a personality trait. It is not a character flaw. It is not even a lack of motivation. It is a feedback loop, a predictable, repeatable loop between stimulus and response that you have trained into your nervous system. And once you see it like that, everything shifts, because now it's no longer about trying harder or finding inspiration. It's about understanding that your brain is not designed to make you successful. It is designed to make you efficient, to conserve energy, to avoid unnecessary effort. And every time you choose the easier option, every time you delay, every time you escape discomfort, your brain learns something very specific. It learns that avoidance works. It learns that you will obey the path of least resistance, and it reinforces that pathway, strengthens it, automates it, until what you call laziness is no longer a choice you consciously make. It's a default response, a conditioned reaction that fires before you even have time to think. And this is the twist you've been missing. You are not battling a lack of desire. You are battling a system that has been perfectly trained to keep you exactly where you are. And the more you rely on motivation to fight that system, the more you lose. Because motivation is unstable. It comes and goes. It rises and falls based on mood, energy, environment. But your patterns are consistent. They run whether you feel like it or not. They execute whether you're inspired or exhausted. And that's why you keep failing. Not because you don't want it badly enough, but because you're trying to use something temporary to fight something permanent. And temporary will always lose to permanent, every single time. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because once you understand this, you can no longer hide behind the excuse of, "I just don't feel motivated." That excuse collapses completely, because now you see that your feelings were never the deciding factor. Your conditioning was. The environment you built around yourself, the triggers you allowed to exist, the behaviors you repeated without questioning. That's what's been running your life. Not your intentions, not your goals, not your plans, but your patterns. And patterns don't care about what you say you want. They only respond to what you repeatedly do. And this is why two people with the same goal can end up in completely different places. One builds systems that force action regardless of emotion. The other waits to feel ready, waits to feel inspired, waits to feel different. And while they're waiting, the system keeps executing the same script over and over again, producing the same results. And then they wonder why nothing changes, why they feel stuck, why they can't break through. And the answer is brutally simple. Because nothing in their system has changed. They are expecting a different output from the same input, a different life from the same behaviors. And that is not how reality works. Reality is consistent. It reflects your patterns back to you with brutal honesty. And if you don't like what you're seeing, the solution is not to wish harder, not to hope more, but to change the structure that is producing those results. And this is where the real shift happens. Because now the question is no longer, how do I feel more motivated? It becomes, what system is currently controlling my behavior? And how do I dismantle it? And when you start asking that question, you begin to see things differently. You start noticing how automatic your actions are, how you reach for your phone without thinking, how you delay tasks the moment they feel uncomfortable, how you default to distraction the second your focus is challenged. And instead of labeling it as weakness in a vague emotional sense, you start seeing it as code, as programming, as a sequence of inputs and outputs that can be interrupted, modified, replaced. And that realization is powerful. Because it means you are not stuck with this version of yourself. You are not bound to these reactions. They are learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. But here's the part most people don't want to accept. Unlearning is not gentle. It is not comfortable. It is not a smooth transition from one state to another. It is a disruption, a break in the pattern that feels unnatural, that feels forced, that feels wrong at first, because you are going against something that has been reinforced hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And your brain will resist that. It will push back. It will try to pull you back into the familiar loop, not because it's trying to sabotage you, but because it's trying to protect what it knows, what it recognizes as safe, even if that safe is exactly what's holding you back. And this is where most people fail again, not because they don't understand the system, but because they underestimate the resistance they will face when they try to change it. They expect it to be a simple switch, a quick adjustment, but it's not. It's a confrontation, a direct conflict between your current conditioning and the new behavior you're trying to install. And in that conflict, there is no middle ground. You either reinforce the old pattern or you establish a new one. And every time you hesitate, every time you fall back into the familiar response, you strengthen the old system. You make it harder to break next time. But every time you interrupt it, every time you act differently despite the discomfort, you weaken it. You create space for something new to take hold. And over time, with enough repetition, that new pattern becomes the default, becomes automatic, becomes who you are. And this is the new reality you need to understand. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And right now, your system is perfectly designed to keep you average, to keep you comfortable, to keep you stuck in a loop of intention without execution. And if you want to change your life, you don't start by chasing a feeling. You start by restructuring that system, by removing the triggers that lead to distraction, by creating friction around the behaviors that keep you weak, by making it harder to choose the easy path and easier to choose the hard one, by designing your environment in a way that forces action instead of waiting for motivation. And when you do that, something shifts, not instantly, not dramatically, but consistently. Your actions start to align with your intentions, not because you feel different, but because the system leaves you no other option. And that's the part that surprises people. The realization that discipline is not about being stronger than your impulses. It's about building a structure where your impulses don't have control in the first place, where the decision has already been made before the moment of weakness arrives. And once you experience that, once you see yourself taking action without the usual resistance, without the endless negotiation, it changes how you see everything. Because now you understand that the person you thought you were, the lazy, unmotivated, inconsistent version of yourself, was never fixed. It was never permanent. It was just the output of a system you didn't realize you were running. And now that you see it, now that you understand it, you have a choice. Not a vague, abstract choice about who you want to be someday, but a concrete, immediate choice about what system you are going to operate under. The one that keeps you where you are, or the one that forces you to grow. And that choice is not made once. It is made repeatedly, in the structure you build, in the environment you create, in the patterns you reinforce. And once you commit to that, once you stop relying on feelings and start relying on systems, everything changes. Not because you became a different person overnight, but because you stopped letting the old system decide your actions. And in that shift, in that transition from emotion-driven behavior to system-driven execution, you don't just improve, you transform in a way that feels almost mechanical, almost inevitable, because now the outcome is no longer dependent on how you feel in the moment. It's determined by the structure you've put in place. And structure, unlike motivation, does not disappear when things get hard. It holds, it persists, it continues, and that is what makes the difference. That is what separates those who stay stuck from those who move forward. Not a secret, not a hidden talent, but a fundamental understanding that weakness is not something you fight with emotion. It is something you dismantle with design. And once you see that, once you truly understand it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to blaming motivation. You can't go back to waiting for the right moment, because now you know the truth. The system is the problem, and the system is also the solution. And that realization, that shift in perspective, is where everything begins to change. So now you see it, not as an idea, not as something abstract, but as something real, something that has been running quietly in the background of your life, shaping your days, shaping your identity, shaping the direction you're moving in, whether you admit it or not. And for a moment, just a moment, everything becomes still, because there's nowhere left to hide, no more stories to soften the truth, no more excuses that feel convincing, just you, and the weight of your own awareness. And it's heavy, heavier than you expected, because clarity doesn't comfort you, it confronts you. It strips away the illusions you've been using to protect yourself, and what's left is simple, almost painfully simple. You've been choosing the easier path, over and over again. And that realization doesn't come with noise. It doesn't come with drama. It comes quietly, like a slow breath you didn't know you were holding. And you feel it in your chest, in your thoughts, in the way your mind starts replaying moments you tried to forget, mornings you gave up too early, nights you wasted knowing you shouldn't, opportunities you let pass because stepping forward felt too uncomfortable. And now those moments line up, one after another, not as separate incidents, but as a pattern you can no longer deny. And there's a silence in that recognition, a pause where you're forced to sit with the truth without immediately escaping it. And it's uncomfortable because you're not used to staying in that space. You're used to distracting yourself, moving away, numbing it with something easy, something familiar. But this time, you don't move, you stay, and you let it speak. And what it says is not kind, but it is honest. It tells you that the gap you feel, that quiet dissatisfaction, that sense that you're capable of more, it's not an illusion, it's real. And it exists because you've been living below your own standard, not the standard others set for you, but the one you know, deep down, you're capable of reaching. And that's why it hurts, not because you're failing in the eyes of others, but because you're failing in your own. And that kind of failure is harder to ignore because you carry it with you. It follows you into quiet moments, into conversations, into the way you look at yourself when no one else is around. And it doesn't shout, it doesn't accuse, it just sits there, steady, waiting for you to either face it or run from it again. And for a long time, you've been running, not in obvious ways, not dramatically, but in small, consistent escapes, choosing comfort when things got hard, choosing distraction when things got boring, choosing delay when things required effort. And each time it felt justified, each time it felt like a small decision. But now, in this stillness, you see what those decisions have built. And it's not what you wanted. It's not who you thought you'd become. And that realization lands slowly, not all at once, but in layers. Each one a little deeper, each one a little harder to ignore. And you start to feel something shift. Not a burst of motivation, not a sudden surge of energy, but a quiet resistance to staying the same. A subtle rejection of the patterns you've been repeating. And it doesn't feel powerful. It feels fragile, like something new, something untested, something that could disappear if you're not careful. And that's where the real challenge begins. Because this is the moment where most people turn away. They feel this discomfort, this clarity, this weight, and instead of staying with it, instead of letting it push them toward change, they escape. They reach for something familiar, something that numbs the feeling, something that brings them back to comfort. And the cycle continues, unchanged, unbroken. But you're still here, still listening, still facing it. And that matters more than you realize, because change doesn't start with action. It starts with honesty, with the willingness to see yourself clearly without immediately trying to fix or justify what you see. And right now, you're seeing it, the patterns, the choices, the consequences. And it's not pretty. It's not something you're proud of, but it's real. And reality is the only place change can begin, because you can't transform something you refuse to acknowledge. And as you sit with this, as you let it settle, something else begins to emerge. Something quieter than the frustration, quieter than the regret, but stronger in a different way. A sense of responsibility, not heavy, not overwhelming, but clear, undeniable. The understanding that if these patterns were built by your choices, they can also be changed by them. Not instantly, not easily, but consistently, deliberately. And that realization doesn't excite you, it steadies you, it grounds you, because it removes the illusion that change is something external, something that will happen to you, and replaces it with something far more direct, far more demanding. That change is something you create, moment by moment, decision by decision, especially in the moments where it would be easier not to. And that's where your attention starts to shift, away from the big picture, away from the overwhelming idea of fixing everything, and towards something smaller, something more immediate, the next decision, the next action, the next moment where you will either repeat the old pattern or interrupt it. And suddenly, that moment feels different, not easier, not less uncomfortable, but more significant. Because now you see it for what it is, not just a small choice, but a point of direction, a place where your identity is being shaped in real time. And that awareness slows everything down. It creates space between impulse and action, space where you can actually see what you're about to do before you do it. And in that space, you feel the tension, the pull of the familiar, the urge to go back to what's easy, what's comfortable, what requires the least effort. And at the same time, you feel something else, something quieter but more intentional, the option to choose differently, to act in a way that aligns with the person you want to become rather than the one you've been repeating. And that tension, that moment, is where everything happens. Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic changes, but in these small, almost invisible decisions that most people overlook. And it's not about getting it perfect, not about never slipping, never falling back. It's about recognizing the moment for what it is and choosing, even once, to respond differently. Because that single choice, as small as it seems, breaks the pattern. It interrupts the loop. It creates a crack in something that once felt solid. And through that crack, something new can begin to form, slowly, quietly, without announcement, without validation, just repetition, just consistency, just the willingness to stay present in those moments instead of escaping them. And as you begin to understand this, as you begin to feel the weight and the possibility at the same time, the noise starts to fade. The need for motivation, for hype, for external pressure, it all becomes less important. Because you realize that the real work is not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not something others will necessarily see or understand. It's internal, it's consistent, it's often unnoticed, and that's what makes it difficult, but also what makes it powerful. Because it doesn't rely on anything outside of you. It doesn't depend on how you feel or what's happening around you. It depends on your ability to stay aware, to stay honest, and to choose, again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when there's no immediate reward. And that's where the shift deepens, not as a sudden transformation, but as a quiet commitment, a decision to stop running from the truth and start responding to it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently, in the moments that matter most. And those moments, they are closer than you think. They are happening all the time, in the way you start your day, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the way you handle boredom, in the way you follow through on what you said you would do. And each one is an opportunity, not to prove something to others, but to build something within yourself, something stable, something reliable, something that doesn't disappear when things get hard. And as you sit with that, as you let it settle, the weight begins to change. It's still there, but it's different now, less like pressure, more like grounding, a reminder that this is real, that this matters, that your choices, however small they seem, are shaping something much bigger over time. And that awareness, that steady, quiet understanding, is what stays with you, not as a burst of energy, but as a presence, something you carry into the next moment, and the next, and the next, where the real work begins. Not in noise, not in urgency, but in deliberate, conscious action, one decision at a time. So after everything you've seen, everything you've felt, everything you've had to confront without hiding behind noise or distraction, it all comes down to something far simpler than you expected, and far more demanding at the same time. Because the lesson is not complicated. It doesn't require talent. It doesn't require luck. It doesn't even require you to feel ready. It requires one thing you've been avoiding in subtle ways for a long time: ownership. Complete and undeniable ownership over your actions. Not your intentions, not your plans, not your potential, but what you actually do when the moment arrives. Because that is the only place your life is truly shaped. Not in ideas, not in dreams, but in execution. And the practical truth you can take from this, the one that will either change everything or nothing, depending on whether you apply it, is this: you must reduce your life to decisions you cannot negotiate with, not because you are suddenly stronger, but because you understand that leaving space for negotiation is what has been weakening you. Every time you leave an option open, every time you tell yourself, "I'll decide later," you are handing control back to the same patterns that have been keeping you stuck. So you remove the option. You define what must be done before the moment arrives. You decide in advance how you will act when it's uncomfortable, when it's inconvenient, when it's the last thing you feel like doing. And then when that moment comes, you don't think, you don't debate, you don't analyze your emotions. You execute, even if it's imperfect, even if it's small, even if it feels forced. Because consistency in action will always outperform perfection in thought. And this is where your life begins to shift in a way that is not dramatic but undeniable. Because the more you follow through, the more you rebuild something that has been quietly eroded. Trust in yourself. And that trust is not built through big wins or sudden breakthroughs. It's built through repetition, through showing yourself, again and again, that when you say you will do something, you do it. And over time that changes how you see yourself. Not in a motivational, temporary way, but in a grounded, stable way. You begin to identify as someone who acts, someone who follows through, someone who does not wait for the perfect moment. And once that identity starts to form, your standards rise naturally, not because you force them, but because you no longer tolerate the version of yourself that settles for less. And that is the real transformation, not the external results, not the visible achievements, but the internal shift in what you accept from yourself on a daily basis. And here's the part most people overlook. This doesn't require you to overhaul your entire life overnight. It requires you to focus on the next decision with absolute clarity, because that is where your control exists. Not in the past you can't change, not in the future you can't fully predict, but in the immediate choice in front of you. And if you can learn to win that moment, even in the smallest way, you begin to build momentum, not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, steady kind that compounds over time. And that momentum becomes your advantage because it reduces the resistance you feel. It makes action more automatic, more natural, until the things that once felt difficult become part of your baseline. And at that point, you are no longer fighting the same battle. You are operating from a different level entirely. But it all starts here, with something that seems almost too simple to matter. A decision, a single action, done without negotiation, done without delay, done because you said you would. And that's where I leave you, not with hype, not with promises, but with a question you cannot answer with words, only with action. When the next moment comes, and it will come sooner than you think, when you are faced with the choice between what is easy and what is necessary, between what feels good now and what builds something later, who are you going to be in that moment? Not who you hope to be, not who you imagine yourself as, but who you actually become through what you do. Because that answer will define everything that follows. And if you're willing to face that honestly, if you're willing to step into that moment without running from it, then you're already closer than you think. And if this is the kind of conversation you've been needing, not comfortable, not easy, but real, then stay with me, walk this path with me, not as a spectator, but as someone who is ready to confront, to act, to change. And if you want more of this, more clarity, more structure, more reminders of what actually matters when it gets difficult, then consider subscribing, not as a commitment to me, but as a commitment to yourself. A small signal that you are choosing to stay connected to something that pushes you forward instead of holding you back. And from here, it's on you. Not tomorrow, not later, but the next decision you make after this ends. Because that's where your new direction either begins or gets delayed again.